So Pastore Brewing are, as far as I know, still the newest brewery in the Cambridge area. They are based just north of Cambridge in Waterbeach, and are run by the father and son team of Ben and Chris Shepherd. Chris previously brewed in the mid-2000s. Following on from some home brewing, Ben went to Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh to complete a master's in brewing and write his thesis on Brettanomyces. I knew I'd stumble on that one. Brett, I'll let him explain it further. It should come as no surprise to anyone that they specialise in sour beers, although that is a vast oversimplification. I'm sure Chris and Ben will explain a lot more about what that means in their talk. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Chris and Ben. Welcome, guys, to the Cambridge Beer Festival online.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so we started brewing here last August. So we've been going about 9 months now here. And yeah, we specialize in mixed fermentation, sour and wild beers. So mixed fermentation, what is mixed fermentation is always the first question when we're trying to explain our brewery. So mixed fermentation is fermenting with more than one yeast or bacteria. So it will generally be either to create a sour beer or a wild beer or both. And in our case, we produce across the whole range and whole spectrum of sour and wild. So we'll be tasting a few different examples of what we make here today. And yeah, talking through our processes.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, perhaps before we start going around the brewery itself, I mean, we could start by explaining the, we kind of got two ranges of beer at the moment, right? One of which we refer to as our fresh range. And that's the stuff you've got in cans there. So I don't know if any of you got hold of Pastore beers. They're going to come in cans like this. We've got some fruited Berliner Weisses like this one, some blood orange. We've got, we do sour IPAs like this. The distinguishing feature of these fresh beers is that they're relatively fast turnaround, right? So from brew day to packaging, it's probably about a month. And they're mixed fermentation in that we're doing a primary fermentation with a, well, I guess a fairly traditional brewer's yeast, although in our case it's Kveik, which is still relatively new on the scene. But it's a brewer's yeast, right? Which is a Saccharomyces strain of yeast. But then critically, we then, to sour it, we add lactobacillus into the fermentation. And a side product of lactobacillus fermentation is acid, lactic acid, which is what sours it. So these beers, I mean, if I open up the blood orange here, I think, you know, if you're having this or one of our others, like the passion fruit or the mango, then these beers, I think they're about 3.2 pH, right, which is obviously the measure of acidity. So fairly acid. It's a hallmark of these kind of acidic beers that they often, although this one's poured with a nice head, that head's going to fade because, yeah, I think lactobacillus tends to inhibit that kind of thing. But what's cool about this beer, I think, is that we've brewed it with these two strains of yeast. We've soured it with the lactobacillus, and we've left that in there, right? So you know, we haven't pasteurized it or filtered it. So in the can, that beer is still, you know, it's still got the microbes in, right? It's still working away, potentially still creating a little bit more lactic acid and changing the profile of the beer, much like a real ale changes profile in the cask, right?
Still a living product, basically.
Yeah, still a living product, exactly. So there we go. That's the fresh range. So.
And yeah, just to return to the fermentation on that, you've got Kveik and lactobacillus chucked in at the same time, co-fermenting. And these are both microorganisms that love high temperature, and they'll ferment the sugars at very high temperature, which just makes for a really nice fermentation profile. So I chucked them both into the wort at about 35 degrees, which is obviously extremely high for ale fermentation. But yeah, the Kveik is known, basically, it's a crazy strains of yeast found by Norwegian, well, they've always been used for Norwegian farmhouse brewing. And recently, Lars Garskjold has been out there basically commercializing all this, not quite commercializing, but he's been bringing it to people, and yeast labs have got hold of it, and now they've propagated it. You can now get a Lallemand Voss Kveik in dried form. We use a bootleg biology kvike, Oslo kvike, and it just rips through fermentation really aggressively at 35 degrees, and lactobacillus is in there with it, and that also loves 35 degrees and is going to be acidifying the beer at the same time. So in that 4-day period, you get all the sugars eaten for fermentation and all the sugars eaten for acidification, and you basically get your sour base beer at that point after those 4 days, and then it goes on to fruit for a further few weeks to condition, and that's how we make our Waterbeach Weisse series, which is our fresh fruited Berliner Weiss style series. And yeah, so that's kind of, we're looking to make a kind of really accessible, fresh sour beer, but not compromise on the process, still mixed culture, and still quite complex in many ways, but something you can drink very easily, hot summer's day in the beer garden. Yeah, so.
Or in your own garden,
or in your own
case
garden,
maybe,
yeah,
at the moment.
it's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're going to go and start the brewery tour now.
Yeah, cool. So I'm going to change the camera to front facing, and we'll have a bit of a tour around the brewery. So yeah, as I go around, I mean, it's not going to take very long, to be honest. It's not like we're a huge brewery, but I'll walk you around and we'll talk through the process of brewing, particularly these beers, the fresh range in the cans, before we return to base and crack something else. So I'm walking down here towards the brew house. We'll kind of go in amongst the tanks here, but you can see here on the left is the kettle, on the right is the mash tun. So I'll walk on down. You can see the grist case straight ahead. In fact, let's wander down to the grist case. So, I mean, I'm assuming, you know, as good camera members, you're probably fairly familiar with the beer making process. But on a brew day, we're putting 300 plus kilos of malted barley, flaked oats, wheat, you know, whatever's in the malt mill is tipped into here. And essentially, you can see that white pipe, it kind of gets pumped up, that white pipe, which then goes into the top of the mash tun there. It's dropped in along with the hot water. Okay, so that's the mash tun. That's where obviously the mash happens. If we have a look inside the mash, there's the false bottom in the mash tun. So that's where the initial bit of action happens on a brew day. So I'm going to kind of come around the side here. So you can kind of see into our brew house here. It's small and compact. This is a 10-barrel brewery. And so here we've got a cold water tank, hot liquor tank. And as I kind of walk into the wet working area, you can kind of see how as we approach the back, we've got a nice control panel. This is Command Central on brew day. And it's from here, obviously, that we can set temperatures, set pumps, and do all sorts of things. So yeah, we'll typically spend a few hours in here in the brew house on a brew day. You can see a fancy and very expensive pipe work here, heat exchanger and so on. So yeah, a few hours in here, you know, an hour or so for the mash, a couple of hours for the runoff into the kettle, another hour or so to boil in the kettle. And at that point, I'll show you the exact point. There, the beer goes through the heat exchanger and through the wall there, where I'm pointing the camera right now. And that must have, well, the wort, I guess, goes in there. I'm going to kind of take you back out of the brew house now, around to the fermentation room, which is where, in many ways...
Before you go back out, Chris.
Yeah, go
on. Just one thing, as a home brewer, it's amazing to me quite how small that heat exchanger is compared with the size of the tanks. How efficient is that?
Oh, it's pretty efficient, right? I'll wander back around actually. So what makes it efficient? I think really, let me just take a step back. So on the right, you've got the cold liquor tank. On the left, the hot liquor tank. Now the cold liquor tank, you can actually chill the water down, right? If you want to, right? So we typically on a brew day chill it down to about 10 degrees, and that of course then kind of flows on a ring into the heat exchanger. So you're putting your, like, you know, almost 100-degree wort in one end of that heat exchanger, and you've got the 10 degrees water flowing in from cold liquor tank. It's efficient because as the cold water is warmed up and extracting the heat from the wort, that's pumped back into the hot liquor tank. So we're kind of not losing it. We're kind of retaining all that energy and hot water. And it's super efficient, right? I mean, once you've got the flow right, we set it to pump through at about 30 degrees, as Ben was saying, which is the fermentation temperature we use for our fresh range, which ferments with quake. And yeah, I mean, it's super efficient and super fast, unless the hop filter, which is this thing, gets jammed for any reason, which does happen sometimes with debris and so on, and that can gum up the works a bit and cause a delay. Right, so if the brew house sees a lot of action on brew day, I mean, in many ways, the most exciting part of the whole process, which doesn't really involve much activity on our part, happens in here. This is the fermentation room. So let's start, this side, you've kind of got, the beer comes out from the brew house. And if I kind of scan down, you can see the tanks in here. Try and step back so you can get a good view of it. Yeah, so I mean, we've got a number of different fermenters and conditioning tanks in here. Yeah, I'll maybe let Ben speak a bit to the process that's going on in here.
Yeah, sure. So we've got our two big DPVs as you enter the room, and that's where we do all our fermenting, or our primary fermenting at least. So for the hot Weisse and sour IPA fermentation, that will be going on in these. Then as they're conical, it makes for easier collection of the yeast down there. And then the beer will be sent on down the room into one of the conditioning tanks. The two at the bottom, that's where we've got all the fruit. And in fact, today I've actually got lots of fruit puree out on the floor defrosting, ready for tomorrow. I'll be moving a Weisse down onto some kiwi and guava. So that happens in the tanks down at the bottom there. And the two tanks closer to us are actually for wild fermentations. So I leave saisons and dark sours and oud bruins conditioning in there for 2 months or so. And then right at the back of the room, we've got the big chunky mother beer tank. So that is where we keep our mother culture. So the beers we haven't talked about yet are our aged beers that are in bottles, and those all share the same culture, which is our mother culture, which we will Solera out of this big steel tank. So basically, we took our homebrew mother culture, which was in a 30-litre fermenter, and when we started the brewery, we stepped it up into 250 litres in that tank. Then we have slowly stepped it up more and more and drawn it off into other beers. But every time we brew the saison wort, it'll be stepped up. So got a constant sort of cycle of fermentation and happily fermenting mother culture in that tank for use of our cellar beers.
Got a quick question here from one of the attendees, guys.
Yeah, go on, Adam.
It says a 10-barrel plant is quite a decent size. Where are your markets at the moment?
Good question. So we're actually selling nationwide. We've actually had a few exports as well, but yeah, mostly nationwide. We're popular in London, in Leeds. Leeds seem to love Pastore beer. But yeah, you can get us in quite a few places around the country. In Cambridge, yeah, we were getting a few sales in the area around here now as well, which is great to see, obviously.
Yeah, the cans are really, what we're going for with that range is really accessible sour beer, which is really a growing market at the moment, and loads of people are into kettle sours and such. And that's the sort of market these beers will enter into. And as we've seen, particularly in the big cities, London, Leeds, they've taken loads of the beer. We're trying to sell more locally, and as people drink more sour beer and mixed fermentation beer, hopefully we will start seeing those sales as well. But yeah, we're shifting through the 10-barrel brews. But yeah, it's definitely a growing market.
Yeah, we built things to help hopefully scale up, right?
Yeah.
As we hope as our business scales, when we've got a bit of capacity in the brew plant to put more beer through. So although we've got a 10-barrel plant, we're not brewing, we're only brewing, slightly over once a week on average. Obviously, if we find we're successful at selling more beer, then we can brew more frequently, twice a week, 3 times a week, more. And then the limiting factor then would be how many tanks we've got to store the beer in, either for fermenting or in our case for conditioning, because a lot of our beers are conditioned for a relatively long time, certainly not longer than your average IPA does.
Yep.
Cool, thanks guys.
Right. Yeah, I mean, should we go and talk a bit about the what's our IPA or talk about cellar range?
Yeah, that's our IPA.
Okay, so we've talked about the fruited beers. Let me just put my camera down. Yeah, so the other fresh beer that you may have got hold of or had is one of our sour IPAs. This is Toccaferro from our recent release. And the process for sour IPAs is actually very similar to begin with as to the fruit. But instead of obviously putting on fruit, we dry hop it. So I think
the fermentation profile is the same for both of them, importantly, but the malt bills are vastly different. And yeah, it'll be heavily dry hopped rather than heavily fruited post fermentation. So the sour IPA we make is usually a malt bill of sort of 70% Pilsner malt. Then the other 30% will be made up of flaked oats and torrefied wheat, which just gives it bigger mouthfeel. And it usually comes out around 6%. But I've been playing around with different finishing gravities to see what works well. Because, of course, when you're doing a sour IPA, you're getting that acidity rather than the bitterness. So it's been balancing the acidity with sweetness and really minimal bitterness, because there's no hops in the boil in this beer. So it's actually 0 IBU into fermenter. And then the only bitterness you'll get is perceived bitterness from the vast amount of dry hopping that goes on. So yeah, it's just about balance, this beer, really. And we've made quite a few now. And yeah, still just trying to tweak the recipe and try and get it right. But yeah, we dry hop with about 15 gram per litre usually, sort of 12 to 15 gram per litre. Different hops every time, just playing around. And yeah.
One of the things we didn't mention, so when we're doing, I mean, we're using lactobacillus to sour these beers. That's kind of, in a sense, the defining characteristic of these beers is the sourness. Now, one of the things is that lactobacillus doesn't play well with hop bitterness IBUs, right? So the IBUs will kill the lactobacillus. You won't get any sourness. So the fruited Weissers, for example, have no hops in them whatsoever at all. The sour IPAs also have no hops in the boil because we don't want the IBUs, right? We need to let the lactobacillus get to work to sour it during the fermentation. So at that point, you can't have any hops, or certainly not many, in our case, none. But then we obviously dry hop it, and you get a little bit of bitterness, but mainly the big floral hoppy character, nose and taste and so on, which is really what we're going for, which I think goes really well with the sourness.
Got another question on here, guys. Can you explain the Solera culture?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that's going to be the beers we were kind of moving on to. So we've also got our bottled range, which we've just started releasing recently, and it's as it kind of comes of age, because this stuff takes time compared to the fresh stuff that you can turn around in a month. Aging mixed cultures, especially with Brettanomyces, you've just got to leave it and let it take its course, and then you've always got to be careful, as Brett will keep eating, and if you're bottle conditioning, you just want to make sure pretty much all the sugars are eaten before you send it in to bottle. But yeah, so the Solera is basically, as we call it, our mother culture. So it started off as our homebrew mother culture, which is a great mix of different yeasts and microbes that we've taken from many places. We've captured yeast from our garden, from crab apples, from the crab apple tree. We've taken dregs from our favorite wild beers in Belgium and America, grown them up, thrown them in the culture, until we really eventually found the one sort of medium mother culture that was had all the attributes we wanted in our beers. So it's more acid forward than Brett forward, so more sour than wild. But so from that, we then every time we brew a wild beer, so we'll primary ferment it, and then when it goes into conditioning, we'll blend in 20% mother beer. So every time a wild beer is brewed, it gets effectively Solera'd with this with the mother beer, and then obviously you'd eventually run out of mother beer, so that's where we have to keep topping up the mother culture as well, which has the added benefit of keeping a constant fermentation in there, and all the microbes and yeast are happiest when they're fermenting, so they keep going, they keep bringing the character we want, and that's how that works, really.
Yeah, and it's worth just saying we would call it Solera because Solera is a technique we use in sherry making, and essentially the average age of the beer in the mother culture is always getting older, right? Because we might, let's say the average age of it is 6 months old now, and we take 20% of it out and replace by 20% of a fresh brew, then obviously, yeah, the average age has got less, but then generally you've always, in theory, got some of the beer that you first put in a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. So on average, it's a way of maintaining a really lovely, rich, old, very well-aged culture, which we then take bits of it out to seed our new releases and make sure they can very quickly attain some of the characteristics of a really truly well-aged beer.
It's a really nice middle ground for almost controlled mixed fermentation. We know the culture, we know what it's going to do, we're really happy with where it's at, and if we inoculate all our new batches with it, we're pretty happy it's going to come out with a really good product. What a lot of crazy guys in mixed fermentation do, we're not doing it at the moment, is to have a cool ship in which you spontaneously ferment with whatever you catch in the air on that given day. And that can lead to all sorts. I guess you put it all into oak barrel and then you blend back to a product you want at that point. And it's exciting stuff, and there's lots of interesting stuff going on and products being made with that. But yeah, we basically set up this brewery to look very much at the controlled scientific side of mixed fermentation. We know what's in there. We know how it's going to behave. And it's been interesting because it has been different to homebrew. And when we got here and started brewing and stepped up the mother culture in October, November, and it got really cold in this warehouse and fermentation completely stopped, and I got very nervous. But we've now got that room warmed up and we got the culture going again. And we're starting to see the first products come from there. So yeah, it's exciting times.
And leads on to another question we've had, actually, as you mentioned homebrewing. Whilst not wanting to give all your secrets away, any tips for anyone who's doing homebrew who might like to try something like one of these beers? Because it's very different from what most people homebrew.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, to be honest, my tip would be to try, what we've just been describing with respect to a mother beer. I mean, it's actually a really easy thing to do. The only thing you really need is patience, to be honest. I mean, brew up a 20-litre batch of wort. Just throw in some dregs from your favorite sour or mixed firm beers. It could be ours, it could be, whatever you can get hold of down your local bottle shop.
The Belgian classics are great for it. They have some of the hungriest, most aggressive bugs in there.
Yeah, throw in the dregs from your favorite lambics or gers, whatever, chuck them in, just seal it up and leave it, right? And that's the hard bit. You've got to leave it for a while. But I mean, if you do that, then a few months down the line, you can start drawing some of that out. So when you brew a new batch of homebrew, you might choose to primary ferment it with, a fairly traditional yeast, a saison yeast, an ale yeast, whatever you want, right?
And that's one of actually the best ways to go about it. Homebrew is actually mixed fermentation saison, because if you primary ferment with a saison yeast, diastaticus, it ferments almost all the sugars out. Then you inoculate with some sort of mixed Brett, lacto, pedio culture, and there aren't that many sugars left. So yeah, it's going to keep eating, and leave it a couple of months to keep eating. But you can pretty much bottle pretty happily at that point. That's what we do for ours, actually. Our wild saison is 1 week primary with saison yeast, 2 months blended with culture in stainless steel, then 3 months bottle condition, which just allows the flavors to mellow and come out how you want them. A little more zip of acidity came through in bottle. But actually, I think you kind of leapt in the deep end there, because you could be brewing these sort of fresh beers on a homebrew level, and it's in many ways a lot easier than the wild stuff. And all I'd say to do those, if you get something like a brew belt and put it around your fermenter, it brings it up to about 30 degrees. You can pitch, as we do with ours, Kveik, which is the Norwegian farmhouse yeast, and a lactobacillus strain, preferably Lactobacillus plantarum, which is just really aggressive and will pretty much sour anything. And then let that ride out for 3 or 4 days with the brew belt on, and you've usually got a very clean sour beer after that time, which you can then take out off the heat and do whatever you want with it. It's a lovely base for fruit or for hopping, or just to have clean as a clean sour beer. So that's certainly what we were doing, and that's not too onerous compared to making a huge wild Solera. But that stuff's, the wild Solera stuff's fascinating, and you can create any culture you like. You can take wild yeast from your local area, from fruit. That is, it does become harder at that point, and you be prepared to start to fail at that as well, because we have had some awful cultures we've drawn from places. But sometimes you just find something amazing, and no one else in the world has that. So it's worth it for that. The uniqueness of the beer you can brew with a mixed culture is what fascinates us.
Awesome. I've had another question from someone going back to your mother culture. Do you expect it to change over time? And might that be a bad thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, it will. It does change as it keeps fermenting. Could that be a bad thing? Theoretically, yes. I mean, you'd hope that day never comes, and it's never come for us in a couple of years. But you've got to be prepared for it. There is, of course, there's a chance that something will go wrong, or you'll get an undesirable characteristic, or maybe there's too much oxygen. Unlikely in a sealed steel tank, but you could have something undesirable coming out of there. And at that point, yeah, we have got actually some other backup cultures going on and such that so we have thought about it, and we would be ready to start propagating something new. But yeah, in about 2 years of having that as our homebrew and now commercial, it's only really gone one way, which is sort of tastier and tastier, to be honest. Yeah, it took a bit of time when we got it back in there. As I said, when it had the cold snap, yeah, it's only really in the last couple of months that it's really coming through to that rich sort of acidic, golden acidic character that we loved so much from our homebrew days.
Yeah, so, I mean, it occurs to me on that kind of note, I'm going to put the camera pointing the other way again. There's one last thing we should maybe show you. I'm going to walk around the back here. So here we go. Here's the barrel program. It's pretty small at the moment. We've got 8 barrels altogether, 6 you can see and 2 somewhere else in the brewery. But this is really the final stage. So we talked about the fresh beers we make, the ones in the can. We've talked about the cellar beers that are made with the mother culture, going into bottles at the moment. But some of the beers, or some of our wort is also going into these oak barrels. We've had some of these filled back in December. And yeah, we'll ultimately be putting these into bottle too. And of course, what you're really looking for here is, a really long, slow mixed fermentation. Again, you're expecting it to be on the kind of funky, wild side of mixed ferm. We've got a mixture of wine and spirit barrels. The big dark barrel at the end. Let me just walk up here. I think that's a rum barrel from somewhere in the Caribbean, if memory serves. So yeah, lots of cool stuff going on here. So eventually we'll be releasing beers out of these, or taking beer out of these and blending them with each other, or with perhaps some fresher wort or fresher beers that we've got coming out of stainless steel. And yeah, Ben was talking about, some of the other cultures we've got going. So here we've got, this will look familiar to any home brewer. But yeah, we've got some, little variants of different cultures we're just trying out on a small scale here, just to kind of see what flavor profiles we get and whether they're worth using commercially. So that's the kind of thing we've got going on. This is kind of like the final stage, if you like, of what we're doing here.
Yeah, let us into the secret about what you're trying there.
Of what we're doing, sorry?
About the small ones, about what you're trying there for possible futures.
Oh, the cultures, yeah, but absolutely. Let me just turn my camera around again. But yeah, essentially we've got one which is just a mixture of commercial Brett strains, and we've got another one which is actually kind of a mixture of dregs taken from mainly from Florida breweries. There's quite I mean, it's probably no surprise, but there's a very thriving mixed firm scene in the US. And I happen to travel to Florida a fair bit on business, so I kind of always bring some cool stuff back. And there's some great breweries. And I'm wearing these t-shirts from a brewery called Old Breed, just north of Miami. And they do some amazing stuff. And so, yeah, I bring some bottles back. We sit down upon the evening, enjoy them, and then think, oh, I know, why don't we chuck some of that in a little homebrew barrel and see if we can make something cool out of it. So that's one of the little experiments we've got going. We'll see how that tastes.
And with these, they're great because you can grow them up. And if you like the cultures, then the barrel program is just the perfect playground for chucking in, okay, we'll just get these Brett strains into one single barrel, and then that becomes a great blending option down the line. And building a barrel program is all about just building up a stock of different tasting wild beer that 3, 6, 9 months down the line, you can taste it all and see what you're going to come up with blend-wise, whether it is going to go onto fruit, whether it's going to be blended and just be a barrel release. And some will just be single barrel release as well if they're tasting beautiful on their own. But yeah, it just started that really. We've got 8 barrels on site, and some are the oldest ones are about 6 months old now, and they're tasting good. So we may well release our first white wine barrel aged saison by the end of the year, hopefully, depending on, of course, how it does in bottle. Because it'll take longer bottle conditioning as well, and we'll probably re-yeast at bottling. But yeah, we've got some really exciting stuff in, and we're going to be bringing in more barrels through the summer. And of course, summer is fruit season, which for a mixed fermentation brewery is massive. We've got some apricots arriving at the weekend. We're going to have saison going on to apricots. We're going to be getting local strawberries in, local raspberries, to get some cherries, and really just blend some of this wild beer onto fruit through the summer, and bottle and have some really nice blends ready for the autumn.
Sounds cracking. I had another question on the chat. Someone says it's exciting to have a brewery like yours in the area. What made you choose Cambridge?
Well, we live here. As simple as that. I mean, I guess we could have gone somewhere else, but hey, we wanted to set up in our hometown. We love Cambridge and the area. We felt, I mean, there's some cracking breweries around about here, but there's nobody doing quite what we're doing. So we thought, yeah, well, why the hell not start that up and add something to the scene, hopefully.
Cracking.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Yeah, certainly in this sort of area, we are lucky now, as someone was saying to me the other day. Actually, East Anglia is starting to become a bit of a hub of mixed fermentation now, but you have to go quite far and quite rural to get to most of the places. But we do have Little Earth Project, of course, who inspire us down in Suffolk. They really go a bit more hardcore than us, and everything is pretty weird and wacky, whereas we're trying to do a little bit more controlled on our mixed fermentation, as controlled as mixed fermentation can be. But I guess when we get to the barrel stuff, we'll start seeing some similar blends come through to the stuff they're doing. Of course, we've got Duration opening up down the way in Norfolk, I believe. Yeah. And they're going to have a whole wild program as well. I've seen some of the folders they've got, and the wood division, which looks really, really nice. So yeah, I'm hopeful for the mixed fermentation scene. It's a really nice little scene in the UK at the moment, and it's only going to grow, hopefully. And yeah, we're just trying to kind of straddle lots of different areas within sour and wild. So we've got the fresh stuff, which, as I was saying earlier, is that kind of really easy drinking in the same sort of arena as all the kettle sours you see on the market at the moment. So just heavily fruited or heavily hopped. Then the 375 mils bottles, which I've just released, which is usually sort of 2 to 4 month aged, unblended. And that's just pretty easy drinking wild beer. So it'll have a bit of funk in there, but it won't be crazy. Then eventually, as we were just talking about, the barrel stuff, which will hopefully be in 750 mil sort of share as the big wine bottles, and that will be blended, and that will be the most sort of crazy stuff we're putting out at the moment in terms of complexity and what's going on in there. But yeah, that'll be, once we've got that out, we'll have our full range that we dreamt of having when we opened up here. So that'll be really good.
Another question online. When did you start appreciating sour beers? Because I think it's quite different from the sort of stuff you used to brew, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I've been into Belgian beers, German beers, for years. I mean, 30 years plus, right? I was massively into Belgian beers probably in the early 90s, and kind of made my own voyage of discovery there with, the lambics and the Gers and so on. And when I was brewing in the mid 2000s, although I wasn't doing any sour mixed ferm brewing, what I did do at the time was brew kind of traditional real ale style, but using Belgian yeasts. So these weren't sour yeasts by any means, but I was using yeasts that that they use for making Belgian Abbey beers or doubles, whatever. And I was putting them into a real ale sort of malt bill and packaging the beer in casks and selling it to beer festival or to local pubs, as cask ale. And that was actually, at the time, that was I was well ahead of the craft beer revolution, right? And at the time, that was really quite cool, right? There was no one doing anything like that. And people would I remember people would get a big pint of foaming real ale, and they would get a real surprise when it had a completely different taste from your average British real ale. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. That kind of beer was kind of inspired by my love of Belgian beers and what those guys were doing. But I didn't have the skill or the knowledge to try real sour mixed ferm brewing back then. And that was kind of the next frontier we wanted to explore, which is kind of what led us to set up Pastore.
Yeah, so I really got into mixed fermentation beer, drinking Belgian beer with my dad, but then also I went out to travel around America a bit, and that's where I found all these American breweries brewing their own riffs on the styles, American wild ales, and just throwing the rule book out the window and making really crazy sour and wild beers that I just thought were brilliant, to be honest, and I wanted to brew them as soon as I got home. So we looked up lots of information online, as you do as a home brewer, and then the man who really has the Bible of sour beer brewing is Michael Tonsmere. American Sour Beers is the book, and anyone who wants to brew sour beer as a home brewer, buy that book. It's absolutely brilliant. Has loads of information on all the different styles and how to do it on a homebrew scale. So we got going, we got cracking on that really. And as the book says, and as anyone will attest to in sour beer brewing, your first few attempts are usually awful and you can't drink them. Then, as we started to learn from our mistakes and build up various projects and cultures, we started getting better. And then it was then that I I went up to Edinburgh and studied Brettanomyces. It was 100% Brettanomyces fermentation I was studying. So just chucking a single Brett strain into a fermentation and seeing what happens, which crazily, it ferments really rapidly and aggressively, and you get a really fruity fermentation, really estery fermentation rather than phenolic. But yeah, it was actually in Edinburgh that I found people brewing these sort of fresh, quick turnaround mixed culture beers. And it was Johnny at the Hanging Bat at the time. And the Hanging Bat is a great craft beer bar in Edinburgh that brews its own beer. And Johnny now heads up Vault City, who brew, of course, they brew in Dundee at the moment, but yeah, they've just been releasing loads of fresh sours recently, and they're really good. Slightly different to ours, more on the sweet, kind of crazy, high alcohol, almost like cocktail style sours, but same fermentation profile. And I learned a lot from him, and I thought, right, when I get home, yes, we've got long-term mixed fermentation beers going on, but I'm going to get good at brewing quick turnaround mixed fermentation stuff as well. Because you've got people who love long-term mixed fermentation beer, and especially lovers of Belgian beer and Belgian mixed ferm. But the new craft beer market especially are people who are grown up on kettle sours and like beer that just tastes like fruit juice. And hence why I was keen to start getting good at brewing that stuff and see if we could open a brewery that specializes and indeed almost entirely brews mixed fermentation beer. So then, yeah, we threw ourselves into trying to brew recipes along the styles of the fresh range and the aged range, and yeah, basically formed all the recipes that we now brew today on a commercial setting. Yeah, so basically, to come back to the original question, Dad was really into Belgian beer. I started getting into Belgian beer. Then I went to America and tasted the incredible stuff they were doing. Then we kind of synchronized and have been making our own riffs on the styles.
Excellent, thank you. I just bought a copy of that book. I had another question. Here's someone says, I couldn't finish my first Sour Creek, but now I really enjoy them. How do you get people to move beyond the initial shock?
It's true, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. That is. I'm not sure I know. I mean, I think the important thing is if you're introducing someone to a sour beer, it's not enough to say, "Oh, just have a sip of that." Right? Because that first sip is like, "Oh, Jesus, what is this thing?" Mm-hmm. Right? But you know, if someone will go back to have a second, a third, and fourth sip, then their palate acclimatizes, and yeah, then I think then you can really get into it. And then, like Ben's been saying, there's a huge range of different sour beers out there. You know, you're kind of the kettle sours that you see a lot of in bottle shops right now are often quite accessible. They're often sweeter and obviously heavily fruited. And some people go for that. You know, it can be an easy gateway.
It's a gateway sour, really, the kettle sour. It gets people into sour beer, and then maybe they're going to be more willing to try something a bit more crazy, something a bit wild, something Brett fermented. So yeah, the kettle sour has done a lot for sour and wild beer in terms of getting a lot of people to actually try our beer and then move on to something a little bit more complex. So it's actually, yeah, it's done a lot of good. The introduction of techniques such as kettle souring and quick souring, because when the Belgians were making this style beer, it was only aged for a long time. Whereas now, yeah, breweries will turn around sours in a week or two. We still hold ours back for 3 weeks to a month because it's still mixed culture, but you can turn it around quickly, and that's an important part of our brewery here as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Cool, so I'm just drinking the Wild Saison here. So yeah, we're on to our cellar range of beers. So as I was describing earlier, this is Saison yeast fermented, blended with the mother culture, stainless steel 2-month condition, then in bottle for, well, it was bottle conditioned for 3 months, this beer actually, but I bottled it 19th of December 2019. So it has been a good 5 months in bottle now. And yeah, it's just about reaching the exact sort of levels we want on these style beers. It's got a light, zippy acidity. It's got all, the nose is mostly Saison, that kind of, you know, the Saison Belgian-y esters and phenolics. And then you've got a little bit of the Brett sort of almost horse blankety thing, but not as deep as horse blanket, more just citrus and hay. I don't want to scare anyone off. Yeah, so a little bit light dusting of funk, I'd call it. Then, yeah, a little bit of acidity that just carries through really nicely to a really dry finish. And this is just really easy drinking, all day drinking saison beer, which is really like one of the styles we love, and we'd love it to be one of our house styles here at Pastore, a mixed fermentation saison. And we've got lots aged in barrels as well for blending further down the line. And so of our cellar beers, we've released that. We've released a raspberry beer, which was a oud brewing style base, so a Flemish style base brown ale. That was blended with the mother culture and then was conditioned on raspberries for 1 month. So it's just extracted all the raspberry flavor and quite a lot of tannins from the raspberry and all the color as well. It pours a delicious red color. And yeah, it's quite fruit forward at the moment. And as the fruit fades, you'll start to see some more funk and acid come through as well. That's got a nice acidity. And then the final beer, which I've just released very recently, it's one of our new releases in May, is Noir, which is our dark sour. And this is a beer I loved brewing on a homebrew scale, because we always brewed a porter as just a homebrew porter. And I knew that one day I wanted to blend it with our culture and see what happens. Because dark sours aren't something that are massively popular, and indeed they're not a massively traditional style in any sense. It was very much something the Americans took and have been doing for a while. But when we did it with our porter on a homebrew scale, it just came out beautifully. It ends up as this interplay of almost vinous red wine character, but with all the chocolate malts and a little bit of roastiness from the malts. And then actually a dry rather than sweet finish. So it's almost a bit confusing to someone when you go to drink porter or a sour beer, and then it's a mix of the two. But I just think it's actually a really underrated style, and we're going to brew it at Pastore as long as we can sell it, because I love it. We've got lots in oak as well, so we'll be blending out of oak. It suits barrel aging beautifully. I've got some in cognac barrels, so we're really going to get some spirit coming through in the final beer there. I've got some in red wine barrels as well, which should be nice blending component. But yeah, that's our releases so far, and we've got something tasty waiting in the wings as well. We've got in the bottle conditioning room, which is my warm office upstairs. I've got a rhubarb saison, which I brewed with the guys from Free Blind Mice. So Alex came down here and we brewed a saison on the 10-barrel brew kit, and in the same way as the wild saison, I blended with the house culture for 2 months. And then a couple of months ago, had the whole family down here chopping rhubarb. We got some Norfolk rhubarb in and transferred the beer onto it and let it re-ferment for a month on the rhubarb. And it's tasting really, really nice. It's been now in bottle for about a month, and I will hopefully be releasing it in June. So look out for that. And it's just got a lovely rhubarb crumble aroma. But then that's the only sweetness you get. After that, it's down to acidic and dry, but a little bit of a dusting of funk, but mostly rhubarb really at the fore at the moment. And then I've got one other project up there, which is another dark sour conditioned on some stuff. But I'll keep everyone updated on socials about those. And then, yeah, like I said, we're heading into fruit season, so we're going to have apricots, strawberries, raspberries, cherries coming in, and yeah, we're going to have some really exciting blends to do over the summer.
I was going to say, as a fan of dark beers and sour beers, I'm really quite excited about some of those things you've got sat in barrels waiting to come out.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
We've had another question from someone who says, when the world returns to normal, might you consider a brewery tap on site?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah. And yes, we want to open a tap room for sure. So at the moment, with our web shop, we're operating a click and collect type thing. And as anyone who's been down here to collect, we always have a chat with them, and they're always asking, yeah, can we have a tap room here, please, when things return to normal? So it's something a lot of people are asking us for, and we've got a great space for it. So we're definitely going to look to put something together here. And it'll be something quite simple, probably, for the start, because we threw a big event here when we first opened, but we'll probably start off a lot smaller with a tap room, just have a small room, probably like a little bottle shop with a few tables and a couple of kegs on tap. And through the summer, we've got a beautiful space outside as well, so we'll put some tables out there, have a little beer garden type thing going on. But yeah, we'd love to have people come and drink here. We don't know how many people would come, but it would be brilliant, yeah.
Awesome. Ali, who's asked a couple of the questions this evening, has said he's enjoyed the blood orange and the Toccaferro so far this evening, and he's now opening the Noir. So thanks for this evening, guys.
Oh, awesome. Great.
I've just finished one of the passion fruits, and I'm onto a blood orange myself now. So
cool. Yeah, well, we certainly hope that next year we'll actually be at the real Cambridge Beer Festival with you all, and yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be great to have our vices on there. Yeah, yeah, perfect. Beer festival.
Yeah, I think your beers would be a really good fit for the Key Cake Bar. Nice and cold on a summer's afternoon.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we've got no more questions on there. So, any final words from you guys about anything?
Yeah, I think we've said it all. I mean, thanks very much for joining, guys. Thanks for the great questions. Yeah, really, hope to see you at the beer festival next year. Hope to see you here or around town in the meantime. And
give us a follow us on our social media, or check our website for updates. And hopefully, eventually we'll be able to open up something here, whether that be a bottle shop or a tap room eventually. Hopefully.
I posted the links for all of your stuff in the chats, and the Cambridge Beer Festival website has got your links on there, and the links to your shop as well. So anybody who's been enjoying what you've been talking about, if they haven't already got hold of some, can go on and buy it and actually try it.
Awesome. Cheers, Adam.
Fantastic. Cheers.
Excellent. Well, thank you for this evening's session at the online Cambridge Beer Festival, guys. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers, Adam. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.